A 210 area code. Who's this? Who am I speaking with? Where are you from?
Yes. Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, sir?
I'm okay. Yeah, so the most historically accurate and national poll that came out after the Democratic debates, which is the SSRS CNN poll, it has some good news and some bad news. The good news is that Biden has dropped 10 points and is now at 22 points, percentage points. Harris is at 17, Warren at 15. And the bad news is that Bernie, for the first time, is in fourth place at 14%. And the Suffolk poll just dropped also from Iowa just this morning, and it has pretty similar results. Biden at 24%, Biden at 24%, Harris at 16, Warren at 13, and Bernie just at 9. They also. That Suffolk poll also had some really bad results for Bernie in Massachusetts, so I really need to go over some crosstabs to evaluate it. But yeah, things aren't looking so great for Bernie right now. So in that last poll, that SSRS poll that was conducted in May, Bernie had 26% of the under 45 vote and 10%. The 45 and older vote, and the latest polling had 21% under 45, with Harris at 18 and Warren at 17, and 45 and older, Bernie is only at 8%.
So he's bleeding more young people at this point than he is older people. Is that it?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's always been extremely strong with younger voters.
Right.
I mean, it was much more pronounced during the 2016 campaign. So, so they also have this thing about, regardless of who you support, which Democratic who's the best chance to beat Trump in the 2020 election. And, Biden still leads at 43%, while Bernie's at 13%. And so the fact that Biden dropped 10 points overall and he still has massive leads in electability is a good sign that people are starting to make their judgment on issues instead of electability. Considering the lack of predictability this early in the cycle, or even after the primary start, this should be talked about more. Clinton actually hit her peak in head-to-head state polling against Trump on May 5th of 2016. Clinton not only had leads in the 5 states that she was expected to win on Election Day, which she ended up losing: Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. She also had leads in Arizona, Georgia, Missouri, Iowa, Ohio, and even Utah. The only state that Trump had a lead in.
What year? Wait a second. When was this? In May of 2016?
Right. That was when she hit the head-to-head peak against Trump. So
yeah. Now, the only thing is that May of 2016. I'll tell you why I don't think it's analogous. Is that in May of 2016, the idea I still don't think that people felt that Donald Trump was the nominee. I think probably a lot of Republicans convinced themselves, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. But Republicans come home. I mean, that's the one thing that I would say, probably skewed those polls on some level, is that people, even some of the Republicans, didn't realize how craven they were.
Well, they supported him in the fall of 2015, and then his support vanished as the primaries got on, to where they heard more about him. And so these are direct head-to-heads. This isn't based on a generic Republican candidate. This is based on direct head-to-heads. But, your point is well taken. I mean, perhaps you're right. I mean, people obviously did change their mind. They changed their mind. I mean, on the 20th of October, polls started changing. That was also the peak in Clinton's lead, and just in 2 weeks later, the polls went down from I had about a 67% chance of Clinton winning. So anyway, so the point is that Bernie leads the pack as a Democratic candidate for president. When you talk about health care at 20%, 26%, Biden is second at 18%. So this provides an opportunity to lean into Medicare for all and talk about the differences from the other top-tier candidates. 3 weeks ago in a call, you emphasized idiosyncratic voters, but there are actually very few of those out there. Most vote on ideology, and as we see more debates, ideology is going to become more important.
Do you
I
think
love
most
looking at
people vote on ideology?
Absolutely. I mean, just look at this latest poll from the CNN poll. Conservative / moderates, Biden has 31% right now. Harris at 11, Warren at 10, Sanders with only 8% of the vote. And you look at liberal, and Harris leads at 24%. Bernie with 20, Harris with 20, and Biden with 12. And that's going to become more distinct as time goes on. So,
I'm not sure. Okay. I mean, I think there's probably definitely some sorting. I don't know that most people do it that way. You've just looked at people who identify, politically in one way or another. But I mean, if you look at the polling of like who are Biden's second choices.
Yeah, I'm pretty skeptical of that second choice thing. I mean, because as time goes on, that's going to move also. I mean, right now it's more about people not being familiar with the other candidates as much. I mean, also that's going to change also in head-to-heads when as Harris and Warren become more known to the general public, their numbers are going to get better against Trump. I mean, look at all the other people that have even less than the top tier candidates. The reason they're not beating Trump is because they don't know them, and people don't want to say they're going to vote for somebody who they don't know their ideology. So,
all right.
So considering the lack of predictability this early in the cycle, or even after the primaries, let's see, where am I? I love looking at the complexity of issues, but some assessments are derived from simplicity. I thought at the beginning of the campaign that whether Bernie wins or not will be an assessment of the strength of the left. I still think that. But it looks like Warren and Harris are winning potential Bernie voters. Bernie wasn't aggressive against Biden or other candidates. This goes against his nature. But Harris won the debate by being aggressive. It seems like he needs to point out differences, especially on health care, between him and the other three contenders. Should he do this at the next debate, or does he have more time to wait? And what else do you think Bernie needs to do to help his campaign?
What I think Bernie needs to do is, and I don't think it's just, I mean, I think healthcare is a part of it, but I think broadly what he needs to do is he needs to basically bring out that FDR quote again, saying they're all, I agree with you. I want to do what you say, and it won't cost a nickel, or whatever that quote is by FDR. That it's not gonna cost a thing. And the idea behind that is that Bernie needs to get out there. I thought the best moment that he had, or I should say, the moment that I think that can be most effective for him going forward, was when they asked him, "But you have to raise taxes on Medicare." He hesitated for a moment, but then he said, yes, you do have to raise taxes for everyone. And I think we are in an era, and I think about the time where Mondale said that we have to raise taxes. I can't remember the context, but he got completely lambasted for saying that, and that created in Democrats like a fear of saying that, hey, you're going to get this, but it's going to have to be paid for, in some fashion. And putting aside, what we know about our government's ability to spend these things, this is more about meeting people where their preconceptions lie. I think that Bernie can differentiate himself from the rest of the field by delivering frank truths and being unafraid to do that and tying that into his capacity or his plan to execute plans. So he can say, we can promise you this and we can promise you that, but this is what it's going to cost. This is not going to be free. It's going to cost in some fashion. And I think if the more he's upfront about saying what the cost is, and the more he's upfront about saying, this is not going to happen without you, the more that he turns it on to, points basically the questions back at us. It's some variation of, ask not what you can, what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. I think that's got to be part of it, because, he's been sort of, around that message where he talks about the idea of there needing to be a movement. He calls it a political revolution. But what he really means is where the citizenry comes in and gets active about demanding things from their political system. Instead of just going and voting, that they actually get engaged and demand things from their political system. And I think he needs to hit this more. And I think he needs to be frank about it and say, like, this is going to cost you. It's going to cost you time and effort. In some instances, it's going to cost you increased taxes. But there's going to be a payoff. And the payoff is going to be you're going to have a much better healthcare system for everyone. You're going to live in a society that is going to decommodify certain elements that are crucial to all of us living a better life. Some of the returns on this are going to be, you're going to have opportunities, and these opportunities are going to be shared by the people that you see when you drive to work and when you walk to work or when you take the bus to work. They're going to be shared across the country. And these are opportunities that everyone's going to be able to engage in, and it's going to create a better society. It's going to create a more, in some respects, a more cohesive society insofar as that we understand that we're more connected with each other. It's going to make for a more healthy society. It's going to make for a society that can act upon crises like what's happening with the climate. But it's going to cost you. And I think it's really important for him to come out and make that clear, that he is asking something of us. And because that is what distinguishes him from, frankly, all of the politicians. I'm quite enamored with a lot of the things that Elizabeth Warren wants to do, but the way in which it gets done, Bernie has a fundamentally different perspective on how that's going to have to happen. And I think he's got to sell that.
I think he does also need to couple it with a lot of doses of how much significantly better life will be after some of those efforts are passed as well, and that there's no complexity around it. I think that's a big advantage. Like, we're just canceling student debt. It's not a new program. It's not something people need to fill out forms for. We're just doing it. It's simple. It's effective. It's bold. It's really clear.
Costs about as much as the Republican tax cuts.
Costs about as much. I think he's also he needs you can't sugar with the medicine as well. I also think
But here's the thing. I think people understand that that's his position.
No, but
I think the thing is that people don't believe it can happen.
Well, that's the element of just purely talking about this movement dimension that he talks about really needs to kick in. And I think
that's what I'm saying.
Right. And I think that people do need to note, frankly, as a significant differentiation with Warren, that now that when push comes to shove, she rightly recognizes that to even push a more limited agenda would take basically the same type of effort. So that this sort of notion that somehow there's a technical plan-dominated option over a movement option doesn't actually exist. And so that she's actually making the same argument, and that the difference is that he actually has this movement in place. And the only other thing that I think is interesting, I'm not somebody who thinks polls don't measure all of these, people who are going to secretly vote or something. I would never hinge my hopes on that. But something interesting that Ryan Grimm said to me recently was basically if, as an example, in a place like Iowa, if the Sanders campaign is being honest about their level of volunteers and people that are actually canvassing for them, you start to get into a place definitionally where you win something like the Iowa caucuses just on pure body mass alone. So that's another interesting thing that's going to need to be measured in terms of their campaign. But we don't know.
We
yet.
won't know that till Iowa.
No, we don't know. We don't know that. But the difference, and this is another interesting thing I'm taking from Grimm, which is that, he made the point that 2016, the really untraditional things were obviously the message, and Bernie's politics are, unprecedented in modern politics, and then the way that they relied on small donors. But besides that, it was a very traditional campaign. You dump money into television, you focus on the early states. In this campaign, they've made the choice to really go grassroots. I mean, that's the reason they're using their email list for all of these other efforts. So, and that's like the part that I think is a gamble and an interesting thing that won't necessarily get measured by the traditional metrics. Not like, oh, there's all these secret voters that aren't showing up, but really like, is there an amplified version of even what we're seeing with things like the Tiffany Caban race or other things here? Like, if you really put people out door to door, that makes a hell of a difference. And if they're actually leveraging that, that could be a big difference maker.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. But it's really hard to know until the actual, results come
Which is
in.
another way of saying that all of this is still super early.
Well,
right?
but look,
this is all super early. I think we'll have a better sense of even that a couple of months before.
I don't think it's, I'm not questioning Grimm's perspective on this, but we all were saying in October of 2016, like, Clinton's just going to kill him with a ground game. He doesn't have a ground game, and that didn't work out because it turns out there wasn't a ground game.
Well, we know that he had. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it's at the scale.
I would
but
imagine
we know that those two things are not alike.
Yes, I'm just saying though that it's. One never knows, but that's my perspective on what he's got to do. And I suspect he's going to do some variant of that.